There's a truth hidden in plain sight, a truth that, if you grasp it, could change the direction of your life forever. It's not flashy, it's not trendy, but it is powerful. It's the truth about the Sabbath. What the church won't always tell you is this: the Sabbath is not just a day of rest. It is a weapon of revelation. It's a divine rhythm, a sacred pattern that God wrote into creation, not for ceremony, but for connection. 6 days you labor, 6 days you grind, you hustle, you push, you strive. But then comes the seventh, and the seventh says, stop, be still, remember who you are, and remember who I am. You see, in this noisy world, the Sabbath is the whisper of God, cutting through chaos. It's not just about taking a break. It's about waking up. It's about aligning your soul with heaven's frequency. The Sabbath is not for the lazy. It's for the hungry, for the ones seeking power, purpose, and presence. Many churches will give you motivation, inspiration, and celebration, but they rarely teach you the revelation of rest. Because in a world that worships hustle, the Sabbath is rebellion. When you keep the Sabbath, you're declaring, I'm not owned by this system. I belong to a higher kingdom. The Sabbath teaches you that your worth is not in your work, your value is not in your velocity, and your identity is not in your productivity. The Sabbath says, I am because He is. The enemy fears a people who know how to rest in God, because rest breeds clarity. Clarity births courage, and courage moves mountains. Don't let tradition rob you of truth. Don't let routine silence revelation. The Sabbath was made for man, not to burden, but to bless. It's a divine appointment, written in the eternal calendar of God. And every week you miss it. You miss a meeting with majesty. This is not about legalism. This is about alignment. The Sabbath is not a prison, it's a portal into power, peace, and perspective. You're not tired because you need more sleep. You're tired because your soul hasn't rested in its source. The Sabbath is the one commandment God said to remember, and it's the one the world wants you to forget. So remember it, reclaim it, and restore the fire of heaven in your life. Because what the church won't tell you is this: your next level breakthrough may not come from doing more, but from doing less, from keeping sacred what God has called holy, from learning to rest in a restless world. The power of divine rest. Why Sabbath isn't optional for the chosen. There is a kind of rest that the world does not understand, a rest that does not come from sleep, vacations, or even silence. It is a divine rest, a rest so sacred, so powerful, that the Creator Himself modeled it at the beginning of time. This is not an optional practice for the chosen people of God. It is a command, a covenant, and a call. The Sabbath is more than a day. It is a divine declaration that says, I know who I am, and I know whose I am. In a world that thrives on busyness and burnout, the Sabbath stands as a quiet protest. It whispers to the soul, you are not a machine. You were made for more than productivity. You were made for presence. And yet, many of us have been conditioned to believe that rest is laziness, that slowing down is weakness. But that is a lie from the enemy of your soul. Because when God ordained the Sabbath, He wasn't suggesting a nap. He was instituting a rhythm of spiritual power. He wasn't commanding stillness to punish you. He was creating space for you to hear His voice, feel His presence, and recharge your spirit. The Sabbath is not man-made religion. It is heaven-sent strategy. God in His infinite wisdom created the world in 6 days, and then did something profound. He rested, not because He was tired, but because He was teaching us to pause, to reflect, to realign. He blessed the seventh day and made it holy. That's not just poetic language. That's a divine invitation. And when you accept it, you step into alignment with heaven's order. You see, the chosen can't afford to live out of sync with God's rhythm. We are called to move by divine timing, not cultural trends. And divine timing requires divine rest. The Sabbath isn't just about ceasing from work. It's about resetting your soul. It's the place where burdens are lifted, clarity is restored, and power is renewed. It is where heaven meets earth in your life, week after week. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Some people will say the Sabbath is legalism, but obedience is not bondage. It's alignment. When you align with God's design, you walk in supernatural flow. That's why Jesus himself kept the Sabbath, not out of tradition, but out of truth. He knew the power of divine rest. He knew the strength that comes from sitting at the feet of the Father. He knew that miracles flow through rested vessels, not restless ones. What the church won't always tell you is that the Sabbath was never revoked. It was never downgraded or dismissed. It was written by the finger of God into stone, not just for Israel, but for every person who calls themselves chosen. If you say you are called, if you say you are anointed, if you say you are His, then the Sabbath is for you. It is a sign between God and His people forever. Not a burden but a blessing. Not a rule but a revelation. Divine rest is warfare. It's how we fight the noise of the world. It's how we tune into the voice of heaven. And it's how we show the world that our peace, our power, and our purpose come not from what we do, but from whom we serve. So make no mistake, the Sabbath is not optional for the chosen. It is essential, because chosen people don't just work hard, they rest wisely. They don't just grind, they align. They don't just survive, they are revived by the breath of God every seventh day. Rest then is not weakness, it is the mark of the strong. And divine rest, that's the secret weapon of the faithful. Sabbath is rebellion, standing against the system of ceaseless hustle. There comes a time when silence is louder than noise, when stillness speaks louder than motion. The Sabbath is that kind of silence, that kind of stillness. It is a holy rebellion in a world that worships hustle, a divine protest against the pressure to do more, to be more, to prove more. In a culture that measures your worth by your work, the Sabbath declares, I am already enough, because I belong to the one who is more than enough. When you honor the Sabbath, you are not just taking a day off, you are making a statement. You are saying that your life is not owned by deadlines, profits, promotions, or performance. You are saying that your peace cannot be purchased, and your soul is not for sale. You are stepping out of the cycle of endless striving and stepping into the rhythm of divine time. That's not weakness, that's warfare. The world doesn't know how to stop. It runs on adrenaline, anxiety, and ambition. People chase success like it's the air they breathe. But what they don't see is the invisible chains, the stress, the burnout, the spiritual emptiness. And right in the middle of that storm, God planted a gift, a day, a sanctuary in time. The Sabbath is a break in the system. It is a reminder that we were not created to serve time, but to serve the eternal. What makes the Sabbath so powerful is that it exposes the system for what it really is. A trap that convinces you that if you just work harder, longer, faster, then maybe you'll find peace. But peace doesn't come from hustle, it comes from Him. And when you stop to honor the Sabbath, you are rejecting the lie that your value is tied to your velocity. You are declaring that your identity is rooted in who God says you are, not what society expects you to be. That's why the Sabbath is rebellious. It goes against everything this world tells you to do. It tells you to slow down when everything else says speed up. It tells you to reflect when the world says react. It tells you to worship when others worry. And it tells you to rest, not as a luxury but as a command, as a lifestyle, as a covenant with your Creator. The system thrives when people forget who they are. But the Sabbath calls you to remember that you were made in the image of God, to remember that your first identity is not worker, hustler, entrepreneur, or influencer. It is child of God, and a child does not earn love, a child receives it. The Sabbath reteaches us how to receive again, how to breathe again, how to simply be. That kind of mindset is dangerous to a world that runs on fear and scarcity, because when you learn how to rest in God, you become unshakable. You don't panic when others panic. You don't break when others break. You are grounded, anchored, whole. The Sabbath doesn't just restore your body, it resets your spirit. It reminds you that the system doesn't own you. Babylon doesn't define you. Pharaoh doesn't control you. You are free. And freedom, real freedom, is not just doing whatever you want. It's having the strength to obey what God wants. The Sabbath is a return to order, to holiness, to power. It's a reset button for your week, your mind, your purpose. And every time you keep it, you push back against the darkness that says you are only as good as your last achievement. So make no mistake, the Sabbath is not passive, it is active resistance. It is spiritual warfare through sacred rest. When you rest on God's terms, you disrupt the enemy's strategy. You tear down the idols of busyness and rebuild the altar of peace. The Sabbath is rebellion, but not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's rebellion with a purpose, to reconnect with the God who still speaks in the quiet, who still heals in the stillness, and who still reigns on the seventh day. The forgotten commandment, why the one God said remember is the one most forgotten. It's remarkable, isn't it? Out of all 10 commandments, the ones written not by man, but by the very hand of God, there's only one that begins with the word remember. God didn't say remember for any of the other. Not remember not to kill, not remember not to steal, not even remember not to worship idols. But when it came to the Sabbath, he said remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. And yet ironically it's the one commandment most people forget. The Sabbath commandment is not just about a day, it's about identity, it's about allegiance, it's about honoring the Creator above all else. God didn't place it in the middle of the commandments by accident. It sits at the heart of His law, because it reveals the heart of His people. To remember the Sabbath is to remember who made you, who sustains you, and who you belong to. It's not just about resting your body, it's about resetting your soul. But look around, the world has all but erased the Sabbath from its memory. Even many churches have downplayed it, spiritualized it, or substituted it. What was once a holy institution has been repackaged as a suggestion, a personal preference, a cultural relic. And yet the Word of God has not changed. His voice still echoes from Sinai, remember. Why is it forgotten? Because the Sabbath doesn't just call for rest, it calls for surrender. It confronts the idols we don't want to admit we serve, our calendars, our careers, our constant pursuit of control. The Sabbath asks you to trust God enough to believe that He can handle the world without your hands on it, that He can bless 6 days more than you could ever accomplish in 7. That's not just a test of discipline, it's a test of remembering the Sabbath is an act of resistance against the system that tells you your value comes from production. It's a divine declaration that says, I don't work for Pharaoh anymore. It takes courage to stop when the world tells you to go. It takes boldness to rest when everything around you is driven by speed, competition, and anxiety. But that's what makes the Sabbath so powerful. It reclaims your time, your mind, and your spirit for God. It's also no coincidence that the enemy has worked overtime to blur this commandment. He knows what happens when God's people remember. He knows the Sabbath is a sign between God and His people. He knows that true rest brings clarity, strength, healing, and intimacy with the Creator. So He distracts, He redefines, He deceives, and little by little we forget. But God never forgot. From the Garden of Eden to the Mount of Sinai, from the ministry of Christ to the book of Revelation, the Sabbath has always been there, unchanged, unbroken, and holy. Jesus didn't abolish the Sabbath, He magnified its meaning. He showed us that it's not about legalism, it's about liberation. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It is a gift, not a prison, a promise, not a burden. So why do we forget the very thing God told us to remember? Maybe it's time we stop listening to culture and start listening to the Creator. Maybe it's time we rediscover the beauty of holy time, because when we remember the Sabbath, we remember the one who remembers us. We step back into a rhythm that predates sin, predates sorrow, and leads us into peace. To remember the Sabbath is to remember Eden, to remember freedom, to remember purpose, and maybe, just maybe, to remember who we were always meant to be. Rest as revelation, tapping into heaven's frequency through Sabbath worship. There is a frequency that heaven operates on, one that is not found in the noise of busyness or the rush of achievement. It is found in rest, not just physical rest, but sacred, intentional, worship-filled rest, the kind that happens when you honor the Sabbath. In a world that is always on, always moving, always demanding, Sabbath rest is not just refreshing, it's revelatory. It opens the door to something deeper, higher, and eternal. It allows you to tap into heaven's frequency and hear what you couldn't hear in the chaos. The Sabbath is not a random day of the week. It is a divine appointment, a holy rhythm set by the Creator Himself. When God created the heavens and the earth, He didn't stop at 6 days of creative work. He sealed creation with rest. He wasn't tired. He wasn't worn out. He was establishing a pattern for us, a rhythm that would connect earth to heaven, humanity to divinity, creation to create. The Sabbath was never about simply pausing from labor. It was always about positioning for revelation. Something powerful happens when you step into Sabbath worship. The distractions fade, the demands loosen their grip, and suddenly, you become aware of God's voice, aware of His presence, aware of your own soul. The Sabbath is not just about what you stop doing, it's about what you start seeing. You begin to see the fingerprints of God in your life. You begin to hear His whispers, the ones drowned out by 6 days of noise. Sabbath rest aligns your spirit with heaven's wavelength. It clears the static of the world so you can tune into the voice that really matters. We often search for revelation in the spectacular. We want visions, dreams, prophetic words, but sometimes the greatest revelation comes through stillness, through honoring the space God created for you to meet Him. The Sabbath is sacred ground, it is holy time, and when you treat it as such, the Spirit of God honors that. He begins to speak, He begins to reveal, not always with thunder and lightning, but often with peace that surpasses understanding, with wisdom that pierces confusion, with presence that heals the deepest wounds. That is why the enemy hates the Sabbath, because it is a portal to clarity, a gateway to power. He wants you exhausted, distracted, confused. He wants you caught in the endless loop of doing, producing, running, because as long as you are busy, you are too tired to hear. But when you enter the Sabbath, you enter a different realm. You are reminded that your strength doesn't come from your hustle. It comes from your God. Your value doesn't come from your performance. It comes from your position as His child. The Sabbath is heaven's counterattack against spiritual amnesia. Every week, it pulls you back to identity, back to rest, and in that rest, God reveals. He restores what was lost in the week. He reorients what became misaligned. He renews what was weary. It's more than a break, it's a breakthrough. The Sabbath was made for you not as a burden, but as a blessing. It was given to reset your soul and reignite your spirit. When you honor it, not out of obligation, but out of love, you discover that worship in rest is deeper than worship in routine. It's more intimate, more alive, more transforming. So don't just take a day off. Enter a sacred space. Worship with your rest. Listen with your stillness. Tap into the frequency of heaven, where God's voice is clear, His presence is near, and His revelation is waiting. The Sabbath isn't just a day, it's a door. Step through it and watch what God reveals. Breaking the chains of busyness. Sabbath is the key to inner healing and mental clarity. There is a silent killer that's been sweeping through our lives. Busyness. Not just packed calendars and long to-do lists, but the constant mental grind, the pressure to perform, the fear of falling behind. We wear it like a badge of honor, as if being overworked is proof that we matter. But deep down, our souls are suffocating, our minds are scattered, our hearts are heavy, and God in His mercy gave us a way out, a key to unlock healing and clarity. It's called the Sabbath. The Sabbath is more than a tradition, it's a weapon against the chaos. It's not just a day off, it's a day into the presence of God, into the quietness of reflection, into the peace that the world can't give and can't take away. And for many of us, it's exactly what we've been missing. Because the truth is, you can't heal in the same environment that broke you. And most of our weeks are filled with noise, stress, and demand. Sabbath is the divine interruption. It's the holy pause. It's God saying, come out of the grind, come into my grace. In the stillness of the Sabbath, healing begins. Not just physical rest, but soul restoration. You begin to notice the tension you've been carrying. You start to feel the weight you've been ignoring. Your thoughts begin to slow down. Your breathing becomes deeper. Your focus returns. It's like a reset button for your spirit. The clutter starts to clear, and suddenly, you begin to see again. You begin to hear again. You begin to feel again. This is no coincidence. The Sabbath is God's design for mental renewal. He knows the human mind needs time to process, to detox, to realign. He didn't create us to run non-stop. He created us with limits. Not to restrict us, but to protect us. And when we violate that limit by running without rest, we start to break down emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. That's why burnout is so real. Anxiety, depression, emotional numbness. These aren't just psychological problems. They are spiritual signals. They're reminders that we've stepped out of divine rhythm. But when we return to the Sabbath, something shifts. It's not just about stopping work. It's about letting God work in you. It's about giving Him space to whisper truth into the places where lies have lived. It's about giving yourself permission to just be, without performing, without pretending. In that sacred space, you remember who you are, not what the world called you, not what your job demands of you, but who God says you are. His beloved, His child, whole, worthy, enough. Mental clarity comes when the noise dies down, and the Sabbath is a holy silence. It's where the fog lifts and decisions become clearer. It's where anxiety weakens and peace takes its place. It's where you stop surviving and start truly living. The Sabbath is not a break from reality. It's a return to it. A return to what matters. A return to balance. A return to God. So many are looking for healing in all the wrong places, but the answer has been there from the beginning, written in stone, modeled by the Creator, practiced by the Savior, honored by the faithful. The Sabbath was never meant to be a burden. It was meant to be a blessing, a weekly rescue from the madness, a weekly encounter with peace, a weekly invitation to breathe again. Breaking the chains of busyness won't happen by accident. You have to choose rest. You have to guard it, honor it, protect it, because the world will always try to steal it. But when you say yes to the Sabbath, you're saying yes to healing, yes to clarity, yes to freedom. And in that freedom, you'll find not just rest, but restoration, prophetic rest. Why the end-time people must be Sabbath keepers. In the final chapters of this world's story, when deception runs rampant and truth is rare, God is calling a remnant, a people set apart, not just by what they believe, but by how they live. In a time when compromise is convenient and pressure is high, one sign will distinguish those who truly belong to Him: prophetic rest. The Sabbath is not just a day of rest, it's a declaration of loyalty, a prophetic act that says, my allegiance is to the Creator, not the culture. And in the end times, that allegiance will matter more than ever. The Sabbath is not man's invention, it is heaven's signature. When God completed creation, He didn't just stop working, He sanctified time. He blessed the seventh day and set it apart as holy, not for the Jews alone, not for one era of history, but for all who bear His image. From Eden to eternity, the Sabbath has been a mark of divine order. It is a reminder that God is not only the Creator, but the sustainer. And in a world that exalts self-sufficiency and idolizes productivity, the Sabbath stands as a countercultural command, a bold and beautiful defiance of the system. In the book of Revelation, we are warned of a time when the whole world will be forced to choose whom they worship, not just in belief, but in practice. The beast system isn't only about government or economics, it's about worship, it's about authority, it's about who gets to define truth. And in that battle, the Sabbath becomes more than a day. It becomes a line in the sand. Because when you keep the Sabbath, you are acknowledging God as the true lawgiver, the true king, the true source of life. That's why the enemy hates it, because it reminds him of the one he rebelled against. It exposes his counterfeit system. It unveils the truth that he has spent generations trying to bury. The Sabbath is prophetic because it points both backward to creation and forward to the restoration of all things. It connects us to our origin and anchors us in our destiny. And those who keep it in these last days are not just resting, they are resisting. This is why the end-time people must be Sabbath keepers, because the battle is no longer casual. The warfare is not just physical, it is spiritual. It is a war for the mind, for the heart, for the soul. And the Sabbath is God's weapon of choice to keep His people grounded in truth. It clears away the noise of the world. It recalibrates the soul. It trains us in obedience, not just out of duty, but out of devotion. It prepares us to stand when the world bows, to endure when others break, to discern when others are deceived. In the end, it won't be enough to claim Christianity. It won't be enough to go to church, sing songs, or know scripture. The call will be higher, the fire will be hotter, the price will be greater, and only those rooted in God's truth, those who honor His commands, including the forgotten fourth, will endure, not because of legalism, but because of love. Because when you love someone, you honor their word, you guard what matters to them, and the Sabbath matters to God. So if you want to be ready, start with rest, prophetic rest, not passive, lazy, or religious observance, but intentional, worship-filled, spirit-led rest, the kind that says, though the world may follow the beast, I will follow the Lamb, the kind that marks you as His, even when it costs, because when the storm comes, and it will, it won't be the strong who survive, it will be the faithful, and faithfulness begins with obedience. Obedience begins with trust, and trust is lived out in rest. The Sabbath is God's His rhythm, His sign, and in these final days, those who keep it are not just obeying, they are prophesying, they are declaring to the world that there is a higher authority, a greater kingdom, and an everlasting covenant, and through that prophetic rest, they will be ready, not just to survive the end, but to reign in the new beginning.